Hey, John Gilroy here. 5 days ago, InfoSecurity magazine had a story. 99% of organizations report API-related security issues today. An interview with the leader in API security. Hit the music, Manny. Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, the podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. Our guest today is Stephen Ringo, Senior Solutions Architect at Akamai, A-K-A-M-A-I. Stephen, how are you?
I'm doing good, John. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, I got up early this morning and I did my homework like I'm supposed to, and I stumbled on this InfoSecurity magazine. It's like, well, why don't I toss you an easy question to begin with, huh? Did you write this article? Wait a minute. Oh, written by Stephen Ringo here. No, it's not. It could be though, couldn't it?
Yeah, it could. It really could have been. Yeah, it's a super interesting article. I think it's funny because, the article mentions 99% do not have a good handle on their APIs and experience API security related events. I think that's very apt. Most of the people we talk to, I don't know if I'd go as high as 99%, but I would say almost every one of my customers either has no clue what their API landscape looks like, or has, at least done some level of investigation, but hasn't quite gotten their head or hands wrapped around it yet. So I believe that article.
I have a neighbor named Patrick Sullivan who's smarter than me and you combined, and I was speaking to him once at a barbecue place, and he said, the API is the network, John. I said, the API is the network. Well, this may be a different perspective, or maybe it's someone who's been beat up and knocked around and see bad things happening, saying, hey, if you take an enterprise architect, they don't realize that what is the magic sauce that connects all these new services? I mean, it's the APIs.
That's right, man. That's right. It's very interesting to understand that APIs no longer belong in just the world of software development, right? You and I had talked briefly about the fact that I started out my life as a software engineer working with APIs in the late 90s, early 2000s. They looked very different, but they still accomplished the same task, right? Application to application communication. And people tend to think of them like that now because, look, APIs, application programming interface, right? Has nothing to do with switches and routers or humans, right? But that's not true anymore. Everything is software based now. Everything is automated. If something can be automated, right? If you can stand it up with code, that means it's using APIs, and the APIs are everywhere. So, it's no longer this idea that if you're a network engineer that you don't have APIs to worry about. So, yeah, Patrick Sullivan, he's a cool dude, definitely smarter than you and I. So it's super cool to hear him say that.
So I do a little work in my garage. My garage door got stuck, and I got out my little socket wrench, 9mm, and got to work and said, well, yeah, API is like a 9mm socket. It's a socket, man. Stephen, you don't understand. It's a socket wrench. You just grab it and you put it up there, right? And I think that is the perception of many. I'm going to an event next week, and I'll bet 10 out of 10 people say the same thing. Yeah, it's like maintaining a refrigerator. You plug it in. Yeah, but it's not a socket. Maybe it was a socket in one time, but now it connects everything, and people are attacking it.
Yeah, that's right. So what's interesting about that is, Gartner put out a report back in 2021. I haven't really followed up on that since then. But they basically said API security is on its track to be the number one threat vector by 2023. Here we are in 2025, right? And I would say that with some of the recent attacks that we've seen, both in the commercial side as well as on the government side with like U.S. Treasury especially, you'd be very hard pressed to argue the point that API security is number one threat vector. And the reason for that is because, as you said, most people don't have a very good handle on it. Most people do still look at it as that socket wrench, right? And they don't realize that those APIs that are sitting out there that they're using for automation tasks and for all the backend communication, it can be misused, right? And it does lead directly to their data in most cases, right? So your databases, everything where you're addressing those with APIs in your code. And it's direct access. So yeah, it's a number one thing. It's much easier to abuse those than to do traditional hacking.
Okay, Stephen, I'm going to give you magically Jedi mind control. So I'll put you in a room full of 100 federal CIOs, and your Jedi mind control convinces them, yeah, it's important to worry about APIs for security. The next step is, Well, where are they? How do we know where they may not even know where or even how many they have?
That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I mean, the first step of the journey, right, is to wrap your head around what you have, right?
Jedi
You can't,
mind control. Hey,
right.
okay, now what's even? You got to
Yeah,
find them. What do you mean
yeah.
find them?
You gotta find them, right? You got to wrap your head around it and get a good inventory going. Discovery, right? That's the start of the journey, right? So API security is a journey, right? You start with discovery. What's out there? What do I have, right? Yeah, it's the number one problem. So yeah, for sure, you should be looking at tool sets with discovery, right? You should look at tool sets that can discover, and not just things like API gateways and stuff where you load in what you know about already, right? So we're not talking about rifling through white papers and things like that to figure out API endpoints that are known about. We need to figure out about our rogue APIs, our shadow APIs, things you don't know that are out there. So how do you do discovery? Well, you do it actively or passively, right? Here at Akamai, we like to do things passively, right? Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to sit in the middle of your network traffic and cause any kinds of latencies or disruptions, right? So we do discovery passively. There are some that do actively, but the key thing is you got to be able to discover what's out there, and not just the things that you should know about, right? It's those things that are hidden that you have no idea exist. Those are the tough ones to grab.
See, for the first time in 20 years, I have friends who contact me saying, "Hey, can you help my son get a job?" And I have 3 resumes right now, and if I looked at all 3 resumes, and there's never one line in those resumes where it says expert at configuring API or
Yeah.
protecting API or know how to design API or maybe even
Yeah.
can examine APIs for coding errors. I don't see that in any resumes these days. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
so that's the soft spot. Yeah, everyone's got this AI shiny twinkly thing, and then you get in the left hook and you don't see it coming. Bang.
Yeah. No, you're 100% on that, man. I think we're on the bleeding edge here, right? So API security is something that people are starting to think about just now, right? It's important to understand it's existed for a while, right? And we started our API security journey back in 2019, 2020, when it was even more on the bleeding edge. It's kind of like I liken it to like artificial intelligence back in 2012, right? People were starting to poke at it, right? But really know a lot about it, so it wasn't a lot of investigation. But here we are, right? We're on the bleeding edge, right? You're not going to see too many resumes that say that you have an
Right.
API security expert because they're not out there yet. It's
Yeah.
hard, right? This is hard. API security is perhaps one of the most hard cybersecurity realms out there because it's not easily defined, right? Um, you can come in and be a firewall expert. That's pretty easy, right? I mean, you know what bad actors look like from an IP standpoint. You know what malformed IP packets look like, all that. APIs, completely different, right? Because they're not malformed packets. They're not any of that. In fact, it is completely possible to use APIs exactly how they were designed to be used and still misuse them by asking the questions that you want answers to in very specific ways to pull database information back that was never intended to be pulled. So it's very interesting. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you. You don't see too many API security experts out there at
Yeah.
all.
I mean, when you started your career, I'm sure you took all those stupid tests from Cisco routers and Security Plus and
Yeah.
CNN and all that stupid stuff. But I don't see any API. Hey, I got my API Cert 1. Oh, good, good. I'm going to the Cert 2. You don't see that. And I think that what
Yeah.
can happen is, and let's not talk about malicious actors. Let's talk about John Gilroy managing a system. I could unintentionally expose sensitive information and then get up the
Absolutely right.
next morning and go, well, I thought I was doing the right thing. And guess what? Fine. You might have been doing the right thing, but unintentional consequences are still vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and let's be honest here, right? The SDLC pipeline for most of our software development these days is accelerated very, very quickly, right? With Agile and everything else, we're looking at trying to put out new code every week, every couple weeks, right? And how many people I know when I started out my life as a software developer, again, a long, long time ago, even in that day, right? They would come to you and say, "Hey, we need to get this code pushed out. Hurry, hurry, hurry! Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. Where are your milestones, right?" And You may be, as a software developer, just hacking away at the keyboard real quick. I'm going to design this API really, really quickly. I'm just open scope this, right? So let's take the idea of like a SQL database. I'm just going to say select asterisk from, right? I'm not going to, I'm going to pull the whole database back and I'm
Of
going to look
course.
at it because all I'm doing is testing. All I'm doing it right now, I'm just testing, right? I'll go back and fix it later, right? But later never comes, right? You get a minimal viable product, right? And they're trying to push it in production right away, right? So the developers oftentimes never get a chance to go back and fix those select asterisk from, right? So you get leaky APIs in production, right? The minimal viable product makes it to production. You have leaky APIs. Next thing you know, you have some sort of bad actor come in. They notice it's leaking, right? They simply start making calls to this published API and they get back your entire database. And depending on what's in that database, it could be very damaging from a data breach standpoint. So yeah, I mean it's true. That's the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah, unintentionally, you could release API keys, and all of a sudden, you
Yeah.
don't even know they're in, and how'd they get in? And your API is still valid. So I know all the key management stuff. You took the test, and
Yep.
I played around with that, and just, what if you give someone the key? And
Yeah.
unintentionally, and it happens, it's a tough one. So your company, AKAMAI.com, been around for 20, 30, I don't know,
Oh yeah.
25 years, long time
Oh
up in
yeah.
Boston. And so if
Yeah.
people want more information, well, I got more questions for you, but if people are out walking the dog or something, they may want to jump on I think there's different aspects of the federal marketplace that you deal exclusively with. In fact, I think you're in the process of getting FedRAMP High approved. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So we're already FedRAMP moderate, right? So all of the Akamai commercial offering is FedRAMP moderate, right? Start out life as a content delivery system, right? And now we are a holistic services and cybersecurity company, right? Of which I deal with the API security. And I deal with it from a federal standpoint, which is great for this particular podcast. But it's important to note that we do this for everybody, commercial, federal, local governments, doesn't really matter. So the platform is holistic and it runs across the board. But yeah, we are working toward FedRAMP High in a new product offering we're calling Defense Edge at some point here. I don't have roadmaps or timelines to give you, but what I will say is because we know how incredibly important specifically API security is to the U.S. federal government, we are actively pursuing this with all haste to get to FedRAMP High.
I began our conversation by quoting from Info Security Magazine, and now I'm a quote from IDC. I think everyone has I guess, a gut feeling that, people are moving away from on-prem to the cloud. And the numbers are, a few years ago, the federal on-prem was around 27%. It's gone down to 5%. And so, okay, so I'll give you the question, well, what could possibly go wrong? Well, I mean, that big gap there, they're going into not private cloud, they're going into hybrid clouds, which are managed by, what's the three-letter word? APIs,
Yeah.
huh? Yeah, that the access coming and going all the time. So, I think it's a problem that maybe you folks identified a few years back, and now all this move to the cloud is coming to fruition. The warning bells. I mean, Patrick Sullivan warned me 10 years ago. He said, "John, wise up." Well, what do you mean? Well, I mean, maybe some people can see this easier than others, and I think it's because, in Patrick's case, he's been all over the world and seen some bad actors. How's that for a nice phrase? And so, if you've seen bad things happen, you got to be look, this is the weak link.
Yeah, no, agreed, 100%. So, that's what we see. You're exactly right. There's been a big push to move everything from on-premise into cloud, right? Regardless of what that cloud looks like. So we won't name names here. But yeah, I mean, the idea here is that you're giving up self-custody of a lot of your infrastructure. And because of that, everything becomes software defined. And when everything becomes software defined, it's all driven by APIs, which is all great when everything is working exactly as intended, when you have all of your security in place and everything is flowing through encrypted channels and everything else. Private circuits and all of those types of things, then yeah, I think you can have this hybrid setup that we're seeing more and more, right? There used to be everybody kind of dreamed, we're just going to move everything in the cloud and we're not going to have anything on-prem. We're not have to worry about it. Turn over all this custody to the cloud providers and deal with only our particular applications that we want to deal with. I think people are finding out that in the day to day, that's just simply not realistic, right? So what you have is you have a little bit of cloud pullback this particular time, and they are entering into these hybrid cloud solutions. So it's important to understand that you do have these APIs traveling back and forth, sometimes, unfortunately, across the open internet if it's not architected correctly. And then, the last thing anybody ever thinks about is, okay, I have my connectivity up and running, all my infrastructure's up and running, my applications are up, I'm bringing in money, everybody's super happy, and then you're not thinking about those APIs. You're not thinking about the things that are controlling your infrastructure and controlling your applications and their delivery to your customers, right? And a lot of times those are left in clear text, right? And then again, like we said, APIs oftentimes can expose your raw data directly through to bad actors via those APIs through misuse, right? So leaky APIs and unencrypted APIs, unsecured APIs, huge, huge problem.
My wife and I went to Africa in June, and we packed all our stuff. But I can imagine a conversation. Let's say me and my wife several years ago, where we arrived at our destination. I said, "Well, did you bring the XXX?" No, I thought you were going to bring the XXX. No, you said
Right.
before. You said you were going to bring the. No, no, no. You said this has never happened in any marriage, I'm sure. Now, let's apply this to technology. Is it possible that if one moves to a cloud service provider, they go, well, CSP, I thought you were going to be responsible for API
Yeah.
security. Say, well, no, 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 no. The agency is responsible for a, oh, so I can see, I can see fingers
Yeah.
being pointed.
No, you're 100%, man. And I've had that exact same conversation with my fiance actually just recently,
Did
where
you
we
bring that
forgot.
up? Yeah.
Yeah, we forgot a whole lot of things, right? Not the least of which were our tickets to some of our events, which was fun. Um, so yeah, I completely resonate with that. But yeah, no, you're right. Nobody really understands exactly where the API security is. Furthermore, there's a little bit of muddying of the water, right? So let's say you do move everything into a cloud and you're like, I'm going to go cloud native everything just because that's the new easy thing, right? So if I move everything into cloud A and cloud A offers a whole bunch of cloud native solutions to me, well, hey, that's the easy button, right? I just say, I want that, I want that, I want that, I want that. And you click roll out and everything rolls out for you and it's all beautiful, right? Who owns the custody of that? Who is in what would you say, trouble should you get hacked, right? You're going to find a lot of finger pointing there, right? It's safe to
Yeah.
assume that if you're moving into the cloud, you are still very responsible for your own security posturing system. And it's important to understand that just because something says API on it doesn't necessarily mean that includes security. So if you go to a cloud native offering, you say, I'm going to roll out an API gateway, it's great. Now you have a very good aggregation point for all of your APIs and a single point where you can do a lot of control, right? Still on you to set up those controls. Still on you to make sure that you're incorporating security into that API gateway, which, by the way, most API gateways don't also include security, right? It's simply what it says it is. It's a gateway, right? It's an aggregation point. That's it. So usually when you're doing this, you need to make sure that just because it says API doesn't mean you're getting security with it. So you need something specifically says API security, and then even then you still have to do all of your own posturing, right? You're going to find out when push comes to shove, if you get hacked, that your cloud provider is going to go, "Hey, it's not on me. That
Yeah.
you were supposed to go in and do all the configuration yourself."
I have a friend named Casey Benko. He works in the commercial world and he earns a living by helping companies integrate Salesforce. And I didn't
Oh
realize
man,
it's plumbing. It's okay.
yeah.
It's a Salesforce pipe comes in and it's all, and so I've never had the API talk with them. Let's sit down, Casey, and have the API talk. Well, what do you mean, Dad?
You're
No,
right.
it's the AP. So that's Steven's job. He walks in there with his beard and the tough look and go, okay,
There you go.
there, Sally, let's sit down and have the API talk. I mean, it's almost like
Yeah.
no one mentions it.
Nobody mentions it. Yeah, it's definitely the last thing people seem to think about. I think it's because we're conditioned, right? We're
Of course.
conditioned. When I'm going to roll out something like Salesforce, I need to put all the plumbing in, right? Routing, switching, make sure all the traffic happens. I'm probably going to need some firewall rules, right? And SF, DC, the new Salesforce uses a lot of really cool web front ends. So probably I need a web application firewall. But the last thing they think about is that API security. That brings us back to the point we were just making. A lot of people seem to think that just because you have a web application firewall or a layer 7 firewall, that somehow that is also protecting the APIs. It is not, right? Yeah, it might protect you against things like SQL injection and malformed packets at the layer 7 level, but it is not going to protect you from API misuse, right? So those APIs come straight through that. There's no malformation to it. They come straight through your web application firewall, straight through all your plumbing, straight into Salesforce, and then start dumping all of your opportunities and your customer base and, pretty much everything. So yeah, it's very important.
I'd like to say it's a static API, like I talked about in the beginning, a number
Yeah.
9 millimeter socket or something, But
Yeah.
in this IDC report I mentioned earlier, they talked about the dynamic nature of hybrid cloud, where things are constantly being created, they're being monitored, they're being refreshed, and change is opportunity. I mean, so I'm going to refresh this for you. Oh, do you know what you're doing? No, I'm going to refresh it anyway. Well, there could be problems brought about with updates.
Oh yeah. So that, and we're forced to update, right? So the new agile process of software development, which is great, right? I'm not here to put anything onto your program management styles that you're running your SDLC through, right? But we are ever pushed to roll out quicker and quicker updates, and those updates are not just quicker, but they are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So yeah, for sure. Anytime you update anything, there's always this problem where you could be introducing new security issues, and APIs are big with that because again, it's just a misuse, right? It's not most of our attacks. In fact, if you look at OWASP API security top 10, the number one attack is something called broken object level authorization, or BOLA. That is a misuse. That has absolutely nothing to do with any kind of actual malformed packets or attacks. That is simply, I'm going to use your API that you told me I'm allowed to use in the exact way that you told me I was allowed to use it. And then I am going to get information out of your database that you did not want me to get. And that's the number one attack, BOLA. So.
Yeah, great. We can go on all day with this. We're running out of
Yeah.
time here. I think the next time we do this face-to-face, maybe at an event of a cloud service provider
Oh yeah.
down DC, and say, okay, Steve, did you walk around the room? How many people, have even talking about this? I, like I said, I go to events all the time, and this is not, hey, our first speaker is going to be Stephen Ringo. No, it's not even. And this is why I think the malicious actors like it. It's because, oh boy, no one ever says about the door in the garage. Thank you. We're going to bolt the front door and the back door. And what about the door in the garage? We don't talk about that. Yeah, this is the unspoken vulnerability, and I think this is going to be real important for the federal and the commercial community. Well, good.
No, 100% agreed with that. I think, and I hope that advocates like myself and like you can bring this to the forefront in a constructive manner, and that these organizations don't have to learn the hard way like some other organizations have had to through the loss and through the data breaches, and having to scramble on the back end to then protect it.
Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time here. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Stephen Ringo, Senior Solutions Architect at Akamai, a.k.a. MAI.
Thank you.